Welcome to the Matchbook Betting Podcast, where we're here for the quarter-final previews for the Rugby World Cup. This is when it starts to really matter. And when you're down in the thick of it, there's only two men you want with you. That's We Love Betting's Mark O'Haire. Welcome, Mark.
Cheers, Alan. Thanks for that.
And, of course, the big man, Aidan Sully O'Sullivan, who's going to guide us through all of the betting markets and some of the top tips for the weekend. Sully, how are you feeling about these quarterfinals?
Yeah, good, excited. Props to Mark in a big way for Uruguay plus 45.5 last weekend. Idiot here backed Scotland. Can knock it this Japanese team right, because we're starting with that today, and I'm fearful that I might just go the other way with Japan and curse them all together. But you've just got to give credit. It was a terrific game on Sunday morning. So glad I went ahead, and just great spectacle of rugby, and probably what the tournament really needed at.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Vegas for a conference and dragged myself out of bed early to watch it, and glad I did. What a spectacle! If we have another game like that this weekend, then we'll be doing very well.
I think we should. I think we should have at least one or two in it, hopefully.
So, I mean, before we get cracking into the action, I hear you've got some big news for us, Mr. O'Sullivan.
Yeah, big news breaking from Matchbook HQ in the last couple of days. Obviously, Al, you know this, and Mark knows this. The Exchange is a fantastic place for betting singles. You do get exceptionally good value, but we now have ACCAs on Matchbook, which is a big thing because, we do have a lot of, maybe smaller recreational bettors, and it's really a good asset for them. And it's going to be pretty interesting this weekend because we're expecting rugby-wise for a lot of people to get involved in this favourite quad, So you'll have South Africa, you'll have New Zealand, you'll have England, and you'll have Wales. And roughly at the moment, just looking at the time of recording, it's coming in about 2.7. So, I mean, in all honesty, I don't know if that's one I really want to be laying either. I think it's pretty straightforward. We may get one shot this weekend, but I don't think we'll get two.
Yeah, I mean, it's something you always want to get involved in. There's a lot of short price favourites, isn't it? Get the ACCAs involved, and you generally get the best prices on the exchanges, especially on Matchbook. Yep. So, I mean, ACCAs is a fantastic new product to get out there. So, I mean, definitely check those out if you're betting on Matchbook this weekend. Squeeze a little bit of extra value out of those multiples before you go. First game of the weekend, then. Yep. You mentioned it already. Japan, South Africa. I mean, we're just going to dive straight into it today. There's far too much to get through to waste time on our blather and chat, isn't there? So apologies if you want to hear us talking nonsense. I'm sure we'll get to that later. The Japan, South Africa, I mean, mouthwatering game, really. If you pitched this one to me before the tournament started, I'd have been like, walkover, joke game, waste of my time, probably not even going to watch. Now, I mean, talk us through the betting, Sully. It's probably far closer than you would have expected a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it's a fascinating market, Alan. I mean, look, obviously we sat down on Sunday morning after that Japan game, or the afternoon, and I kind of thought about this line in general, and I had a couple of points shorter than the 14.5, 15 that's there right now, and I suppose I was kind of thinking to myself, is this kind of, recency bias? I just saw Japan. I just saw, a clinical performance against Scotland. Am I not kind of giving South Africa enough props here? But I think it's a pretty fair line, all things considered, because the way South Africa have kind of even set up, the 6 forwards on the bench, 2 backs, they're kind of coming at it the way we kind of figured that you can beat Japan is to, make the rucks an absolute free-for-all, the bigger men. But have we not thought of this earlier in the competition? We thought that, the Irish would do this, that the Scots would do this. And Japan, they're such a clever team and so well coached that I think they actually kind of use your strengths against you sometimes. And I think they could give South Africa some problems here. I mean, you look at the set piece, even their scrumming, they adapt. They have obviously the smaller props, and we don't want to be too general with this because they got some big men as well, but they scrum lower, they hit the breakdowns lower, they're quicker, the ball comes out. And what I've been impressed with them at is that in game, and we say this with other sports, the great teams, even, with NFL or football, they adapt at halftime, they adapt to the break. They don't always just go with plan A. They have a plan B and a plan C. And this Japanese team seems to kind of react on the fly. And 14.5, that key number, is just very intriguing to me because, funnily enough, it's weird because we never really have a situation where teams play each other in the warm-up games where they're kind of either scheduled to play each other in the groups or in that quarterfinals. But these teams played a couple of weeks ago. and South Africa won quite convincingly, 41-7. Now, I watched that game. It was a Friday morning kickoff, watching the office, and I kind of saw with Japan that the scoreline kind of flattered South Africa a bit. Defensively, South Africa were well up for it. Even, when they were 20 points up in the second half, they were still, really on it. But I do think that Japan in this World Cup have brought their attacking game to a new element, and they're just adapting quicker. Look, we'll go on about their players like the likes of Matsushima and Fukuoka the last day. They're just some incredible, skilled players. They can play at pace, and that's what they will have to do against South Africa. Keen to get Mark's thoughts on this, but they will have to play this game at 100 miles an hour. They'll have to move around the big back pack. They'll have to actually kind of vary the small bit as well, kicking wise, to test Willie Leroux. I know Mark is kind of big on that one as well, that he feels that Leroux is the weak link, and he's right defensively with South Africa. But they'll have to play it that way. I think they will play it that way, and it's all set up for a fantastic spectacle. Not a major play for me this weekend. I don't think South Africa to win, but I would take Japan plus 14.5, 15 with the start.
Mark, you've been Mr. Japan throughout this tournament, really. How are you feeling about this one?
Mr. Japan, I love that. I think it's probably the most difficult game from a betting perspective to analyse across all four quarterfinals. My preference is with Sully there to be with the plus 14.5 star. I think that 14 figure or 14.5 figure is so important because it makes it a 3-score game for the Springboks to overcome, which, whilst very, very much capable, history shows quarterfinal ties are often tight affairs. The last 3 World Cups, 7 of the 12 quarterfinals have been settled by 1 to 12 points. If you look 4 years ago, one of those games that didn't or wasn't settled by 1 to 12 was when the French were absolutely shambolic against New Zealand, and Ireland lost 5 of their most key players to injury against Argentina. So those kind of runaway games aren't commonplace in knockout rugby. Obviously, we've talked about the Springboks in major depth throughout the competition as contenders to go the whole way. And I'm glad Sully brought up that game against Japan, because I think it's the warm-up game against Japan, because I think it's easy to look at that and see, well, if that's what happened 8 weeks ago, then surely that's what's going to happen this weekend. Well, that wasn't the case. The scoreline didn't reflect how the match panned out. Japan did reasonably well. Now, obviously, Springboks are very good in this area. You look back at their record against teams ranked 7th to 12th, which is where you put Japan in the bracket. They've won 14 of 15, 9 of which by a margin of 14 points or more, which is where the handicap is. But the surprise factor obviously isn't there for Japan either, but I just think it's really difficult to dismiss them as not necessarily no-hopers, but a team that's going to be losing this match by 3 scores. They were 43-point underdogs in this match 4 years ago in Brighton. They've come so far since then. They've enjoyed the best schedule in terms of rest and recuperation. They've not rotated their squad massively. They're certainly confident in their game plan and how they and the players tasked to kind of play out that game plan. The speed, the precision they've played out, the accuracy, it's all so impressive so far. I do think they can unsettle this Springboks team if they do get possession. Willie Leroux is a weakness. And if Japan can be clinical and composed in finishing their opportunities, they've got a chance. I just have an issue really with possibly with their game management when it's under pressure against this South Africa team, because they're going to be hit with a physical onslaught they've not seen just yet. Ireland didn't really bring it to them. Scotland tried, and also their ability from the boot is a little bit concerning for me. But I do think they can be competitive here. As I say, physically this is a major step up in class. The Springboks game plan is going to all be about trying to strangle them at source, slowing that breakdown down, just blitzing them wherever possible in line speed and defence. And they've got the kicking game as well to pin them back and keep the scoreboard ticking over. It's a little safety first. It's a little territorial. It's quite direct, but I think that's what's needed against Japan. I do expect Springboks to win this match, but I wouldn't be too confident at all about them covering this kind of spread, to be honest. And if I was to get with Springboks on side, I'd be looking towards the winning margin of 11 to 20. And even then, I'd want a decent price, at least 3.5 or bigger to consider it. So I do think, obviously, last hurrah in front of the home fans, conditions to suit, Japan will go out swinging. But I prefer them with a start, but it's not a heavy play.
Yeah, you mentioned it briefly there, that the breakdown. The referee in the breakdown is always a massive factor in any game of international rugby or club rugby these days. Japan probably had a slightly easier ride of it than some teams you could maybe say in this tournament? I mean, is it one where maybe there's a view to sort of checking out the first 10 minutes of the game, just seeing maybe sort of how that breakdown is being refed and maybe taking a view there, or do you think that I'm possibly overstating the impact of that?
No, I think the breakdown, I mean, Sully will tell you all about it, but the breakdown to me is almost where the games are won and lost these days. And you're absolutely right. I've looked at the competition and games in isolation. Just, I don't even know the rules sometimes because there doesn't seem to be any. And, Ireland came out, I don't think it was sour grapes, but after the Japan game and said they've had confirmation for at least 2 penalties that went against them at the breakdown shouldn't have been given. Whether that's favouritism to the host nation or not, I'm not going to get into that. But, it's going to be a battle. It's a battle I'd probably say South Africa should win. But I don't think it's going to be an easy. Japan are not going to step back and allow the Springboks to dominate on the floor. So it's going to be a scrap. And it's one I just can't wait for it. It's going to be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I think Alan, it's about setting the agenda here. If Japan sit back and allow South Africa to set this agenda and make the game about kind of a South African game, forget about it. This will be over by half time. But I don't think they will. They haven't done in this tournament so far, and I can't see why that they won't play their own game on Sunday either. This team, to their credit, I mean, you. Definitely in the first game we saw those kind of nerves against Russia and obviously the home expectations, but since that game they've been exceptional.
Yeah, I mean that handicap line does look big here, and it is a tempter. But like I say, I'd be a little bit tempted to wait and see how the game plays out first before getting too heavily involved. Is it a bit of a small stakes bet or maybe a swerve for you guys? Do you think?
I very small stakes on Japan plus 14.5. Look, I'm a big South African fan. I still think they'll win the competition, but it's just a big number to cover. In the other thing, and Mark touched on it as well, and I've got a bit of stick on YouTube or Twitter or something recently on this about Tamara. If you look at his kicks, honestly, he's actually got a good few points this World Cup, but the ones he's getting are in front of the post or they're small. But if he's anywhere right or left down by the 20s, he's not making kicks, which is a worry because with Pollard, Pollard's a 90% plus kicker. Tamara, to me, is still a very weak link in that sense. His overall game plan game management is really good. Kicking out of hand isn't bad. He gets the backline moving really well. But I'm telling you, as a goal kicker, if there's a pressure kick here, I just don't fancy him.
Yeah. I mean, let's move on to Sunday's other game then. The big one in this house, Wales, France. I mean, I'm already feeling nervous here. I mean, looking at that French side they've announced, looks like they're going to have a little run at Wales. It doesn't look like they're going to try and match Wales in the game plan. I mean, what's your kind of views on this one early doors? So let's talk us through the betting first, and then maybe give us a view on where you think your money will be heading.
It's only going to be heading one way in this one. Wales 6.5 point favourite currently. Match odds, they're pretty short at 1.45. You can back France 3.7. Wales for me, Alan. I think we were chatting about offline this morning, just the better coach team, better structure, better organised, more together team. We've obviously seen, rumours coming from the French camp about a possible mutiny over Jean Girardot and the captaincy there, and like that dynamic of Galtier coming in a year or two ahead of schedule. I mean, if you look at Galtier's previous jobs at Montpellier and Toulon, he's left in a blaze of glory all the time. He's obviously a good coach. He wouldn't be getting these jobs otherwise, but he by all accounts, he's exceptionally headstrong, and it's his way or the kind of highway. And this French team, I mean, look, they obviously have that extra week off. I don't think it suits them. I think they're a kind of a team that need to be playing. I don't know if they're the kind of team you want out there in Japan doing nothing for 2 weeks, or being away from the cauldron of a game. I think Mark will be somebody in agreement with me here. I couldn't be having France even with the start right now. Surprised to see Camille Lopez doesn't start at 10. I think, in fairness to him, when he has been playing in the group games, France have probably functioned best then. Big one for them is having Penon Dupont injury free. They were doubts up to last week, and obviously that game being called off against England was good for them for a bit of rest and recuperation. But obviously there's doubts about Jonathan Davies here and a few about Dan Biggar, but this Wales team, fancy them all the time to make at least the semi-finals, and I don't see any change of that. And I know we'll play this whole card. You just don't know what you get with the French or whatever, but let's be honest about it. If we're going to get good or bad France, I think I'm more likely to or on the side of the bad France.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make about Biggar and Jonathan Davis there. You know, both selected, both playing. Wales have had tendency to put in patched up players into matches and see them limp off after 20 minutes. We've seen it before, specifically with those two players, in fact. That's possibly a concern.
I do kind of worry about that. I've said that before, that the centres, you know, Hadley Parks and John Davies, very good unit. They play really well together. But Wales have no real depth there. If you compare that to, like, you know, England, Ireland, New Zealand, South Africa, where you've seen different centre combinations. I know you've got Owen Watkin there, but like, he doesn't really strike me as a guy that can really get the job done there at 12 or 13 in this kind of arena. But luckily for them, I think they're going up against two centres who don't really like playing with each other, Makatawa and Fiku. They're just not a good combination, and I'm surprised that they've kind of gone with that. A massive miss for France and early in this tournament, and it wasn't really, I don't think, spoken about that much because he kind of went under the radar, was the loss of Wesley Fofana. Like, this guy's been plagued with injury the last couple of years, but for me on his day, probably the best 12 in the world, and big loss there. So yeah, far too many holes in this French team, like where Wales are going, like their overall package far more, and even at, you know, laying 6.5, I'm quite happy to lay that.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, the weakest favourite of the four this weekend, Wales. Usually you'd expect one of the favourites to get knocked over in the quarterfinals. Is this going to be the one for you?
No, not at all. No, this is quite straightforward for me. I've taken Wales by 1-12. If you get that anything above or around 2.5, I think you're in a decent position. Just head to head, they've won 7 of the last 8 since 2012, all of which were in Six Nations fixtures. It's obviously quite competitive games. Only one of those games was settled by more than 11 points. As I said in the last game, 7 of the last 12 quarterfinals have been settled by 1-12. Exclude the All Blacks and look at Tier 1 teams against each other at quarterfinal stage. 7 of the last 8 have been settled by 1-12. We've talked enough about Wales's capacity to get results, whilst also not kind of offering the sort of, I don't know, swashbuckling, sort of line-breaking rugby which you would associate with the likes of New Zealand. But I know Welsh fans get a bit, you know, prickly when you sort of mention Warren Ball, but you know, Sean Edwards' marvellous defensive systems do help Wales enormously, because they don't offer a huge amount going forward in some of these tight matches, but you do always feel like they've got the capacity to get over the line and get the result, and I think that's the case here. You know, looking at their record against Tier 1 teams since November 2018, which I appreciate is not a huge amount of time, but 11 of the 13 games were settled by no more than 12 points. And obviously, if you look at the pattern of their game so far in the competition, they've never really cut loose. Even, you know, I know there's a second string there against Uruguay, so it didn't really matter. But even still, I never get the impression that they are really going to put teams to the sword. So, yeah, I like Wales. I like the fact that you know, I've got to trust the management, and Jonathan Davis and Dan Biggar are going to be fit enough to play. I think they're crucial in terms of leadership, the game management, experience. I always like a Welsh team that are confident, and it feels like the Welsh team. I know, Alan, you might not be, but it feels like this Welsh team.
He's never confident, man. He's the most pessimistic Welsh person I've ever met.
I'm always concerned about a confident Welsh rugby team. I think when they're in a good headspace, they're a difficult beast to beat. And you just compare it with France, and you know, Sully touched on it there. But you know, on a player-by-player level, they're terrific in most areas of the field. They're just an absolute shambles and put together. And you know, I've kind of been waiting to really kind of blow my head on this, because coming into the competition, they were pissing me off a little bit, and you know, I wanted Argentina to win that match, obviously. I've been trying to oppose them anyway. And just, I don't know how much what we read is true, but the talk of Gerardo and Brunel falling out, sending Thomas Ramos home injured when he's not injured, calling up Antonio when he's actually injured, you know, barely getting over the line against Tonga. They were dreadful against America. I think they actually surrendered that game against England. I think if they were offered the opportunity to play it, from what you hear, they actually decided they didn't want to play it because they didn't. You know, we hear that, you know, playing Wales or Australia didn't really matter to them. Well, no, they just didn't want to play England, which is, embarrassing, really. So they've obviously shown in patches in the first half against Wales and Paris in the Six Nations, and the first half against Argentina in this competition. So they do have ability. Sully's right, Dupont and Pinot are massive bonuses to be fit, but I just look at them, they're not a unit, they're not cohesive, there's no leadership, there's no discipline. Fitness-wise, they're subpar towards Wales as well. The unstructured stuff that they put together is fantastic, but it's not a case to build a bet around France, and I just see them losing this match. And I think Wales will do enough, get the job done, start looking towards the semi-finals, and therefore I prefer the 1-12, just get a bit more price, a bit more juice in the price compared to the handicap.
I think it's fair to say that Mark is reasonably cold on France there.
I know I've said it as well, and I've fallen into the trap, and I hate myself for it. But this whole France are so unpredictable, you never know what you're going to get. They're not. They're just crap. They've been predictably crap for ages. When was the last time they finished in the top half of the Six Nations? When was the last time they pulled off any sort of result? I know they beat England in Paris, but England were going through a terrible run at that point. You know, it's been so long now since we've seen this consistency about this French team where you actually feared them. You know, even though it got to the semi-finals of the World Cup, they were pretty pants going into that competition. You know, I'm just kind of sick of them now. That they're just rubbish.
the only proviso I would have on that is you mentioned before, you said this one looks pretty straightforward to me. I'm not sure Wales and World Cups and straightforward really go together either. But
look, they're, like Mark says, though, I mean, like, at least you know what you'll probably get with Wales. You know, we've seen in the last couple of years. They are fundamentally a very good team. They're experienced. They're on the road a while now. They've got a proper coaching setup, which is obviously their last tournament. And look, I mean,
they know exactly where they're going.
Yeah. There's no point overthinking this, and like Mark said, I mean, we said this before, Alan. Like the start of every Six Nations, you those guys that go onto Twitter and they say, "Oh, France 20-1 to win the Six Nations." There's a bloody reason for it. They can't win 2 games in a row, for Christ's sake.
I'm pretty sure I was one of those guys once. So let's move on quickly.
Yeah, you probably were, yeah.
Just the other thing, I know that the mutiny in the French camp is something that always happens, but you know, we look at it from outsiders and neutrals at the World Cup and say, "God, it's a long time to be together in camp when." You go into this World Cup, you know, 4 or 5 weeks before you even get to the knockout stages. Well, actually, most of these guys have been in camp for possibly 2-3 months beforehand as well. You know, it's a long time. And I can understand if the players start getting sick of the sight of each other and they do start ending up sort of tearing their heads off each other. The French more so than anyone else. It's not a position as a professional sportsman, as I'm not, it's not a position I'd particularly be fond of, going into the international camp for longer than 2 months at a time.
And the other side of that, Al, I think if you were to look at the 8 teams that are left in the competition this weekend, probably for me, the 2 that strike me as probably the most together groups are probably, Wales and South Africa. Just from what I've seen and what I've heard, Wales very much strike me as kind of almost like a club team. And I don't mean that in a disparaging sense. I mean in the sense that they're just very much together. And then, like, if you look at all the names of the team sheet, they've been with each other a long time now. And like Mark said, like those French, I will say, and I think we touched on it in the anti-post preview. There's a hell of a lot of indifference even in France at the moment, by all accounts, and even the TV viewerships is down for the group games. Their top 14 season still seems to take precedence over most of these things, even with the internationals way, and they very much are building for when they're hosting the competition in 2023. I wouldn't rule them out then, by the way, because they do have some really good guys coming up, and you do see some shades of it there. And if you get the younger guys coming up, they might just come together, but there's still a lot of carry through there from the last couple of years where they've, just like Mark said, they've just been crap. Simple as.
Wales, all right. France, crap. Bet on Wales. There you go. So
there you go. Simple
everybody.
Easy.
Well, we've spent plenty enough time on that one. Let's move on to probably the 2 most interesting games for me of the weekend. Anyway, the first one being Ireland, New Zealand, or New Zealand, Ireland. I think it is technically, isn't it? Sully, talk us through the markets here, and maybe give us a first impression of where your money's going to be headed.
12.5 is the current line. We've seen a bit of money for the Irish here at Matchbook all week. Maybe that's a bit of British Oil's money, Alan, who knows. Just under 5-1 in the match odds. You can back Ireland at 5.9 at the moment. 1.22 are the All Blacks. And the total, I was hoping this was a bit higher, so I could back them under here, but they've caught down to this. 42.5 is the total. I give Mark the go around here first to this, and I'll come back in after what he said.
Obviously, New Zealand, I think, are fair outright favourites to win the competition. We've talked about that enough. I still think they're the team to beat if you're going to go the whole way. But saying that, this isn't the same New Zealand side from 4 years ago. And I do have an itching feeling that Ireland have got a performance in their locker, and they're going to come up to Tokyo and leave everything out there on the park with one big performance. And whether that's my green tinted spectacles talking or not, I think there's various intricacies that went behind the wins over New Zealand in recent years, which people can look at as irrelevant. Certain players being unavailable, matches being played in Chicago, and New Zealand were celebrating the Chicago Cubs winning the baseball or whatever. And but from an Irish perspective, every single player in the starting 15 has beaten New Zealand, and I think that positive mindset and that belief is absolutely huge when playing a team like the All Blacks. When you are the likes of Ireland, I'd even put Wales in that bracket, England as well. And I think being written off as 12-point underdogs suits Ireland, suits them right down to the ground. They feel like they have a performance in them. They're very confident, despite what we've seen so far in the last 2 years. They just have to be composed and clinical, which is always the key words, the key buzzwords when playing the All Blacks. I'm not so sure they've got it in their locker to beat them, but I think 5-1 is probably a fair reflection of that. But I certainly don't see them getting completely overawed. I think New Zealand overcoming a 12-point handicap is pretty steep, so I like the look of New Zealand to win by 1-12 at a bigger price. Ireland's form, as we know, has been iffy. They've quite rightly been sort of talked about as peaking in that Dublin win against All Blacks last year. And if you exclude the warm-ups, their 2019 victories this year have come against Scotland twice, Italy, France, Russia, and Samoa, which is hardly a copybook, and their 3 defeats have come against England, Wales, and Japan. However, you kind of have to keep going back to Ireland, New Zealand, not just in those kind of recent 3 or 4 games, but in the past 6 times the 2 teams have met, 5 of them have been settled by no more than 12 points. In the last 4 tests between the 2 teams have seen an aggregate score in Ireland's favour of 87-83, of which Ireland have only conceded 18 penalties compared to New Zealand's 45. So as well as that kind of clinical nature, composure, discipline is absolutely imperative for Ireland, who normally are one of the squeakiest teams on the international stage. The discipline has to be right. It hasn't been great throughout the competition, and I have a bit of a worry here because Nigel Owens is the referee. You sort of talk about the breakdown earlier in the conversation there, Alan. He's one who sort of has a bit of a relaxed atmosphere towards it, and Ireland just have to stifle Ardie Surveyor. I think Josh van der Fleer is the kind of guy to go and do that. I think elsewhere, I do think, as much as I don't think he's a fantastically rounded player, I think Bundy Aki's absence is a blow. He started 23 of Ireland's last 28 tests in the last 2 years, had 18 carries against the All Blacks in Dublin last year. His physicality is a bonus when it's there. Robbie Henshaw, obviously a fantastic player, but he's very short on game time. So it's hard to kind of distance myself from this as an Irish fan. But I think if there are a couple of tweaks, I guess you could say, in the All Blacks armoury. This is their first massive, real important match now since late August. They've only played one since late August, which was that South Africa game, which was 5 weeks ago. And if you look at that, I tried to watch the highlights again just to refresh my memory on it. They weren't that great for a lot of it, and the kind of match turned on a 5-minute passage of play where they scored 17 points off turnovers, which kind of goes to show how clinical they can be. Brody Retallick's barely played at all. His fitness is obviously questionable, and I think if Ireland do start strongly, the weather is supposed to be very wet in Tokyo. I know we talk about the weather a lot and never predict it correctly, but if it is wet, that plays into Ireland's hands. I just think, if the stars align, they've got a chance, and to have a chance, they have to be those things: disciplined, clinical, and composed, and they have to start strongly. There's a lot of ifs and buts really there, but I do hold out hope that Ireland could put in a decent 40 minutes and then see where they are from there. So Ireland to be competitive and go down in a brave defeat New Zealand by 1-12.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about Wales, being a well-drilled unit. I mean, that's what Ireland are above all else, isn't it? Really, you kind of, hear talk from the camp and you speak to people, and there's I don't think they're the most happy squad. I don't think that it's necessarily the most cohesive in that sense, and I don't think the coach is one who necessarily engenders that kind of positive, happy, upbeat attitude with his players. But as a professional unit, they're incredibly well drilled and incredibly well capable of executing a game plan. Do you think they can do it, Sully? Do you think that they've got a sniff here?
I think they can, and I think they will, and I think they match up pretty well against New Zealand. And we've seen that they've won 2 of the last 3, and even cast your mind back further to 2013 when Ryan Crotty got that last-minute try in the Aviva in the corner. That was one of Schmidt's first games coaching Ireland, and they should have won that as well. And whatever his general game plan, it just upsets New Zealand a bit. Then you've got the Andy Farrell factor, and we've seen him with the Lions as defence coach last year, in 2017. And there's just these kind of key components there that, and Mark touched on it there, the first 20 minutes against South Africa, the Irish play a very similar kind of rugby league / kind of, press defence, and you cannot play a drift defence against New Zealand. It's just one of the worst ideas you can do. You've got to play that old kind of, blitz rugby league. It's got to, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. Now, in fairness to New Zealand, they've seen that with South Africa during the Rugby Championship as well, and they adapted their game plan accordingly. But like Mark said, those tries were exceptional opportunities. There were, tries scored from a long way out. For me, they were just, defensive, misreads or lack of concentration from South Africa. It was probably because it was early in the tournament. They were getting used to the conditions. Like Mark says, we're now 5 weeks in. Teams don't have any excuse at this stage for kind of adapting. And I just don't see, the Irish giving away those kind of tries. And for Ireland to win, it's just going to be about what they do well, retaining possession, picking and going. And in fairness, like you said, Al, as much as there's probably this lack of kind of flamboyancy in Schmidt and his general game plan, when he has a good game plan, this team can execute it. And when it goes well, it goes very well. And what kind of really impressed me in the Samoa game was the kind of return to form of Johnny Sexton, which is a massive thing because, in all honesty, coming into this tournament, I kind of had my doubts there, and I had said it on the prior to the Japan one that I didn't really think him not being there, maybe Carberry and Carty picking up the slack wasn't that bad a thing. But clearly, when he's in this kind of form, there's no one like him to run this back line. And if him and Murray, I thought, was great against Samoa too. So if those guys are playing, this is not only a game that they can cover, this is quite potentially a game that they may just sneak. And they just in betting terms, Alan, because like if you look at New Zealand in general, I mean, odds compilers with New Zealand will never, ever want to be taking any chance because they're a bit like, just think of teams like, Dallas Cowboys and NFL. They're always overbet anyway. They're always overbet. Like they're an iconic brand. Everyone wants to be on the All Blacks, and the recreational bettors, the neutral bettors that are sitting down, say, "Oh, back to the All Blacks." It's great to be on the All Blacks side because they are, when they're really good, they're really good.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just look at a line and you're kind of thinking, I don't know, on a neutral field that New Zealand are nearly 2 converted tries better. I don't. And just looking at the lineups, I don't think they are. I think that, look, I'm not saying the Irish should be favourites here, but I'm kind of I'm struggling to see how they're this much better. I think a fair line would have been 8 or 9 or something like that. And and again, I see the point because you're probably going to get hauled in on the All Blacks then, and your number is going to get to 10 or 11. And whereas you stick it up there at 12, you probably take a balanced enough book on both sides anyway. But I don't know. Again, it may be the green tinted glasses, but I've kind of heard from people even outside of Mark and myself with non-Irish allegiances, and they're kind of thinking the same way I'm thinking on this one, that it's quarterfinal, it's going to be a bit of wet and drizzly in Tokyo, and take the points. I think this is a close game. I think it's a low scoring game, hence why I was saying the total. I was hoping that total might be 46, 47. I could back and under, because the last couple of games against even, in Dublin and places, and granted, the Irish haven't played New Zealand in some years now, but they've been, tight affairs. They've been goal-kicking contests. There's been very little tries, and, it just strikes me as kind of possibly the lowest scoring game of the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, they're always going to be a bit. The odds compilers are always going to be a bit defensive on New Zealand as well, because they get put in. They'll be putting everyone's acca, won't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Acca's now on Matchbook. So
there you go. Good man, Al. Great
plug
there. Yeah, you're doing my job for me.
But genuinely, that is a point as well. The odds weren't necessarily. There's a lot of things that the public don't always necessarily understand that goes into the odds that are put up at some of the, especially at the fixed odds boys. But I mean, I was asking the question on Twitter to my audience of degenerate Gambling fans. I said, at what price do you bet Ireland against New Zealand? And 71% of people wouldn't bet them below 8-1, which I found extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, who did you think they're like? I mean, this Irish team, we look back the last couple of years, and yes, 2019 hasn't been the greatest, but I mean, this is still the core team of 2018 who beat New Zealand. And in all honesty, beat them well in Dublin. You know, the scoreline mightn't have reflected it, but they were by far the better team in November. And yes, that's 11 months ago, but, you know, there's not a whole lot has changed for me. I mean, it's
the fear factor is completely gone out of the window here.
I think so, Mark. And not only just that, you know, the Irish teams of when I was kind of growing up, and same with Mark, they were beaten before they got into the field against New Zealand. I mean, there was so many valiant defeats where, you know, the Irish would put it up them for 60 minutes and then the All Blacks would run away with like Christian Cullen, Joe Lone, and these kind of guys. But if you even look at some of the teams, some of the guys here, like the likes of James Ryan, they've beaten the All Blacks at under 20 level as well. This isn't like something, you know, and like Mark said, this All Blacks team, as good as they are right now, they played really well in this tournament. They're not the team of 2015. That team was, you know, even beyond what 2011 was. That 2015 All Blacks team is probably one of the best All Blacks teams I've ever had. And, you know, that's not this team.
The leadership from that team is gone. You know, Kieran Reid's probably the only player. Bowden Barry, I guess you could say, he wasn't a leading member of that team, but that's why I'm just amazed at Ben Smith's being kind of jettisoned from the 23 altogether.
And Ryan Crotty, I was surprised at that one.
Yeah,
even on the bench, Alan. Like I think, like you know, looking at the bench, Sonny Bill Williams and Jordy Barrett, not bad players. But if something's going wrong, like you know, in that midfield with Anton Leonard-Brown and Jack Goodhue, I'd love to bring in Crotty there just to steady, because the Irish do not like playing Crotty. Crotty has a really good read on Ringrose and Henshaw, and I think I'm not totally sure if he's carrying an injury or something, but I think it's a bit of a miss there that, you know, he's been totally jettisoned from the 22.
Sonny Bill's not been the same player for a while. I think even going into that Lions tour, his form's dipped in the last 2 years. So, yeah, there definitely are weaknesses there.
Well, we're after exciting ourselves, Alan. In a major way.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest, I was in Vegas. And I was trying to look at the lines, and they use American odds over there, which I never really understand. So I misread the board, and I thought Ireland were 11-2, and I was like, that's a definite bet. You know, even at 5-1, I'm a little bit tempted. 6-1, I'd be
just for
a
cheeky score. Like I mean, it's just a massive price for, you know, a team that's beaten 2 of the last 3 occasions. So yeah, it's a fascinating market, and obviously it's a market that is kind of taken into account that the Irish lost to Japan, but you know, there are a lot of things in the air. But like Mark said, I think this could be, you know, they're firing shot here with Joe Schmidt's potentially last game, and we could get a serious performance here on Saturday morning. I have to stop talking, you know, because I'm getting exceptionally excited.
So, just to clarify for the listeners, viewers, Mark, you're more leaning towards New Zealand 1-11, 1-12, and Sully, you're more leaning to taking Ireland with the points.
I'll take the 12.5, yeah, at 1.87.
Yeah, interesting. I'll be honest with you, I'm probably going to back Ireland on the outright, but especially if the price nudges up a bit, which I'm hoping it will as we get a bit nearer the time in New Zealand.
Quite possibly will, yeah. Quite possibly will.
I asked the same question, you know, what price would you back Australia against England, and got a much more mixed response. The actual winner in the end, narrowly, 30% of votes, was 3-1. So people perhaps not quite as confident about England against as they are here.
It's funny because they're being well backed to matchbook, England that is. Mainline is up to 9 right now. Obviously I've seen some 7 and 8 around early on the week. Then he makes that change with George Ford. We'll get to that in a second. 44.5 is the total as well. I'm going to go to my humidity man, Mark O'Haire, to get some humidity Tokyo. Oh, sorry, it's in Oita or whatever it's called. So that might be one I'd be kind of interested in. Interesting market, interesting dynamic. I mean, you know, I'm still trying to wrap my head around Ford being drafted from 10. I think he's been one of England's best players in this tournament. I think it's obviously a definite tactic that, you know, when Farrell goes to 10, that they just want to get a bit more physical in the midfield. You know, Cheika picking Jordan Pitea at 13 is a bit of a lightning bolt as well. So I'm kind of thinking, by the way, I think this guy is a serious player. I saw him I saw him make his debut for the Reds in Super Rugby this year, and you could see that this guy is going to be a player, right? But throwing him the cauldron of a Rugby World Cup quarter final, going up against Tulagi and Slade, albeit he's coming back from an injury, but tough one, very tough one. I think the line seems to be kind of bang on. Interested to hear Mr. O'Haire's thoughts.
Yeah, Mark, talk us through this one.
Yeah, I mean, England fair favourites, so then we can deny that. But they haven't really convinced me in this tournament. They haven't really convinced me for a while, to be honest. He's tinkered with his team, surprisingly so, as Sully says. I'm not a George Ford's biggest fan at all, but he has played well in this competition. And, to move away from settled combinations at this stage is a surprise. The humidity factor in Ita is very high. It's around 90% at the moment, even if the temperature isn't above 25 degrees. But that to me suggests that Eddie Jones is going all about the power game, one-up rugby, keep things tight in testing conditions, and just blow the Wallabies off the park, really. And in selection-wise, he's got the Thunder Polars back on the pitch together. But I do think they're lacking a little bit with moving Tuangi to 12 rather than 13, losing that second playmaker. I think Slade at 13 is a lovely player, but he's barely played consistent rugby now for months. And defensively, the back three have got vulnerabilities about them too. So they're not a team without weakness. I just think they're a structured team. They've got that serious power game. They're very solid at the set piece, and Farrell's game management and the boot is a major asset too. They've got a Saracen spine, which know how to win these tight knockout games too. So, but make no bones about it, it would be a surprise if they lost this match. Since the World Cup, the embarrassing World Cup exit 4 years ago, they've won all 6 games against the Wallabies, 4 of which are by more than 12 points.
Yeah.
And they scored 30 points or more in 5 of those as well. But I think we'd be fools to look at those games in isolation and not kind of look at Australia and say, let's be honest, outside of Rugby Championship and World Cup duty, they're pretty flaky at the best of times in these tour games at the end or at the start of their season. So set piece they have improved immeasurably. They've got their own level of physicality across the park, scavengers at the breakdown, bit of X factor out wide. But Michael Cheika, as much as I love him, I look at him, I just think, what are you doing? Because he hasn't got a clue what to do. With his half-back combinations, I don't think Leo Lafano is the guy to steer the ship in a tight game like this. The selection at Pattaya at 13 is really ballsy. Obviously got his teammate Karevi inside him, who's absolutely fantastic. But it's a huge occasion to be throwing in a 19-year-old. Obviously, if they can keep possession, play the high-tempo style, move England around the pitch, like they did in the second half against Wales, they've got a real chance. But for whatever reason, they've been starting these games very, very slowly. Discipline has been a massive issue too. Areas they have to improve on to have any chance here. And they need a kind of solid and reliable goal kicker here to get the points on the board, because England aren't going to give them too many chances, I don't believe. So I think England are fair favourites. I think the handicap is probably about right. I don't suspect they'll blow Australia out of the water. There is that inkling feeling that Australia have a performance in them like Ireland. I think when the chips are down, World Cup quarter-final, you kind of don't want to write them off too much. So for me, it's a narrow win for England. So going back to my favourite market, winning margins, England by 1 to 12, 2.65. That will do for me.
They really should call that the Mark O'Haire, shouldn't they?
Wonderful
just
market.
Ring out your book. I want a Mark O'Haire on the rugby. That's through the card. I think both of you, and probably like very few of our listeners, would love to see Australia win this one. But
never said that.
Well, I'll just stand on my own. Then I'm sorry, everyone. But I struggle to see it. I mean, you start breaking these teams down into units, and passages of play, and you just can't see Australia coming out ahead in anything really, apart from possibly the back three. Dangerous.
That's
they can
what I was
score
kind
some
of looking
tries,
at.
especially against the defense. I mean, it's solid, but Watson, May, and probably Slade, you wouldn't be betting your house on them keeping Australia out for some tries, would you? But in every other area.
I do like the look of the Australia three-quarters line. I think Corbetti's had a good tournament. Getting Reece Hodge back is big for the Australians as well. You've that added dimension that he can take the long-range goal kicks as well. This Jordan Potato thing might go. It just reminds me of, if you remember, Matthew Tate being put into that. Do you remember that one? Instead, it just reminds me of that one in a small bit. Like his same age and thrown into, what was it, a Grand Slam decider, or Wales were going for Grand Slam at the time in Cardiff. Yeah, so it just kind of strikes me that way, and that went really, really bad.
Gavin Henson knocked him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go.
Out of him,
yeah, and I think it took him about 4 years to get another cap. I don't think that'll be the same way with Pataya. First of all, Australia don't really have the depth anyway, so he'll definitely get caps. Karevi's huge for them. Beale is big. It's just like Mark said, modern rugby union, like the game is very much controlled by, your 9 and your 10. And I would have probably picked White ahead of Guinea, and I probably would have picked Tamu ahead of Leo Leofano. So there you go. That's just my opinion, but I think there's a few people thinking that as well, because if Australia are to have a chance here, they have to play very similar to how they played in the second half against Wales. And to his credit, Tamu, while he's a bit kind of flaky as well, he was the guy who kind of, instigated that kind of comeback and, really got them going and firing. And they have to play that kind of game against England. And you look at the England spine, it's probably the front five they're probably going to win it. Like, Makavunipola, Jamie George, Kyle Sinclair, Mara Toje, Courtney Laws. But I did see something on Twitter recently. I can't remember who said it during the week, that I couldn't reply because obviously I've got to be careful, that I don't be insulting anyone. But I really want to insult this person now. You'd have been proud of me. This guy in particular thought that this game would be like 2007 in Marseille in that quarter-final where England won every scrum. Now, if English fans think that they're going to win every scrum against this Australian scrum, they're in for a rude awakening, because that Australian front three are proper scrummagers, and that's not going to be the way to win this game. They might win it elsewhere, but it won't be won in the scrum, in my opinion. They have really improved in that area, and I don't think you can just automatically bully this Australian team in that sense anymore. They have a hell of a lot of weaknesses, though, and the line seems absolutely bang on to me. I think if it was 6-7, you'd probably be getting hauled in England. And,
they might not win it in the scrum. They might win it in the line-out, though.
Possibly, yeah.
They'll want to try and bully Australia, as you say there, Sully. But I think Australia's one of their probably an area they have to focus on is England's composure, especially under pressure. And if they're going to have a chance, they have to start getting under England's skin. They haven't been tested enough in the last 12 months. And when they have been tested, you go to Cardiff when they were ahead and in complete control. Well, started getting under their skin, having a few rucks with them. Suddenly they start losing their composure, and suddenly the game swings completely against them. Again, at Twickenham against Scotland, it wasn't necessarily the physicality that did them, but I do think there's a lack of leadership in that team from certain individuals, and I do think they can be rallied if you get amongst their skin. So I'm hoping Australia really go for the throat straight away on Saturday, and we get a bit of a niggly match, which obviously will play into Australia's hands.
Yeah, like I don't think Farrell has ever really kind of convinced us as a captain type, a great player as he is. He's never convinced me anyway of being that kind of leader. And
Sinclair, Laws, Itoje, all of them, they've all got short fuses if you get in amongst them.
Yeah, another guy I'm surprised too, like George Cruz seems to be kind of a calming influence there in the line-out as well. I'm surprised maybe not to see him start, but obviously they're looking at Laws, probably just that extra bit of physicality. By the way, two of the most annoying head coaches in the world that you will ever get in World Rugby. We hopefully will never see their likes again, because this is Cheika's last go-around with Australia. Could very well be Eddie Jones' last one, but two Randwick guys played in the same club in Sydney, and two of the most annoying human beings I've ever come across.
Harsh and big Mikey Checky. I think
I don't know.
Eddie Jones absolutely spot on what he said last week.
That's your Leinster bias coming over. I can assure you of that.
I mean, I feel like I was a little unkind to Australia, and obviously one area we haven't talked about, which I think will be completely crucial and possibly one of the most tantalising matchups of the whole weekend is you've got Hooper and Pocock against Underhill and Curry in that breakdown. I mean, that's going to be absolutely fascinating. Yeah. I'm not sure who the ref is. I'm not sure how that's going to go. I probably should have looked that up. Apologies. I mean, what do we make of that one? Who's going to come out on top there? Because that could be sort of game defining.
I'd be interested to hear what Sully thinks, but I've been slightly disappointed with David Pocock in 2019. I don't think he's been at the same level he has maybe 4 years ago at the World Cup or ever since. I know he's had his injuries, had a time away from rugby too, but Michael Hooper just is a machine, performs at the same level every game.
Yeah.
He'll give you an 8 out of 10 every game. He's just such a reliable, outstandingly physical man, and just look at him in awe, really. But I'd probably favour England slightly in that sense, just because I haven't seen the same David Pocock we've seen for a few years. But I'm hoping he brings his A game here.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think injuries have just kind of killed him the last couple of years. He's just had so many of them, and it just slows him down. I mean, look, I still don't mind the look of that kind of back row, because I think they're going to fight fire with fire. With Underhill and Curry in the back row, that you've 2 7s there, and you're going against them with 2 7s, which kind of makes sense. I get it. I was kind of liking the over here, 44.5. The humidity factors kind of maybe turned me off a small bit, but these games, like Mark said, there'll be some big margins in the last couple of years. I do think Australia there's probably is a try or two in them in this, but there could be 3 or 4 tries in England. That's the problem, I think. And 44.5 doesn't seem like a massively big number, but again, it's kind of turned me off with the 95% humidity or whatever else is there. But that's probably my only play in this one. I'd be kind of a small wary that 1-12 one as well. I think England, if they do get ahead, they might be able to kick on here.
Yeah, I mean the total's an interesting one, especially when you factor in the possibility of cards. I would be very surprised if
referee is Jerome. Yeah, and Jerome Garrett says as well. Very good guy. Yeah, good guy to give a card, and I'll see with the French element. Will let an absolute free for all at the breakdown, so that'll be kind of interesting. Maybe
buy cards points.
Cards points, yeah.
For this one. So just to wrap up from the betting angle on that one. I mean, Sully, you're not really got a strong view here, Mark.
No, I might. I probably would play over 44.5, even with the humidity. I think that number is probably factored in a bit. I think this is pretty high scoring anyway.
Yeah, you can definitely see Australia getting at and through this England side, certainly in the second half, when that humidity really sort of starts to factor into the stamina a bit more. I mean, Mark, how strong are your views on this one?
Yeah, reasonably strong. I think England win this game with a bit of room to spare, but I don't think it's going to be a bloodbath. So England 1-12 at 2.65, I think is very fair, really. I'm always taking these winning margins just because of the price, really. You get a slightly bigger price, and you take that with the jeopardy of England winning by 13 or more, which is completely conceivable, but I think that's factored into the price. So history shows quarterfinal ties are pretty close affairs, and I do think Australia are slightly closer to England than we've seen in the 6 head-to-heads since the last World Cup, at least. And if they are going to go out, they're going to go out in a blaze of glory and give England a right old game. So I'm probably more hopeful than expectant that it's England by 1-12, but I wouldn't say I'm not confident at all.
Yeah, currently 2.64 on Matchbook, England 1-12, which is definitely a lot more attractive than backing on the handicap line on the match odds for me. If we're looking for some bigger priced winners this weekend, Sully, let's have a little thought exercise. If we've got a mythical £10 bet, what are you sticking it on to try and get a decent return this weekend?
I am going to go with a first try score bet in the England-Australia game.
Is it a second choice hooker?
It's a first choice hooker.
It's a first choice hooker. Amazing.
There you go. Well, I'm not going to do it for first try for second choice hooker. Think about this now for a second, okay?
I mean, you might.
So I'm going to go with Tolo Latu. Tolo Latu at 28.0 is my mythical one. I think that rolling maul is quite good for Australia. He's been really good with the Brumbies as well. He scored a lot of those off the base of the rolling maul. So that's my one. And if it's a £10 risk-free bet, I get my money back anyway, which we'll get to in a second.
Mark, what are you sticking 10 quid on this weekend if you want to get a big price winner?
We've talked about it already, but whether it's my green spectacles talking or not, I think Ireland at 5-1 is a backable price. Anything below that, probably not. But they've shown, we've talked about it enough. They've shown in recent matchups with New Zealand, they know New Zealand's ace cards. They're very capable of keeping them in check. As I say, I do expect New Zealand to win this match, but very narrowly. But you wouldn't put anyone off backing Ireland at 5-1 or bigger, because they're very much capable, as we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, like I said before, I'd probably be putting my own money on it. But if you want to put someone else's money on it,
Yeah.
Sully, how do we do this?
The great thing about it is, if you don't have a Matchbook account, you can now sign up today for a £10 risk-free bet, and you can have it on the Irish, you can have it on Tola Lata, you can have it on Australia, you can have it on Japan, and if they don't win, you will get your money back. So not bad at all, and that applies to new customers only. Unfortunately, can't give it to existing customers. And if your first bet loses, we will refund your stake up to a max of £10. Bet must be placed within 7 days of sign up, which suits us grand because games are on this weekend. ACCA bets don't apply, which would have been a lot of fun. And you must be 18 or over, Alan. So that suits all of us. We're definitely over 18.
I just about squeak into that one. Yeah,
squeak into that one. I think we're almost out of time, Alan. Let's do best bets fast. I think.
Sorry, buddy. Yeah, okay.
No, I checked my time a second. I was like, oh.
There's so much to talk about this weekend.
There is, yeah.
Amazing slate of games, and we probably could have talked for another hour there. But Mark, best bet for the weekend.
Kind of directly corresponding what I've just said, but New Zealand to win by 1-12. It's just shy of 2-1 shout, so I think that's very fair. Tight matches between these two. I just think New Zealand have that little bit extra X factor to see them through.
Sully, best bet for the weekend.
Wales -6.5, and they will be singing
for God's sakes.
They will be singing. They will be singing in the valleys on Sunday morning for breakfast.
I mean, we're going to fall out if that loses. I'm telling you that for nothing. But, so Wales minus. I talked over you there, mate. Sorry, Wales -6.5.
Wales -6.5.
And Ireland.
Go on, give us your best bet.
My best bet for the weekend. France on the air rights. No, I mean,
edge.
I don't know. I like I say, I like Ireland. I mean, I may end up looking really stupid here, but I think Ireland with the points and Ireland on the outright as an additional bet for smaller stakes. I think that's where I'm going to be going. I would say to anyone listening, by the way, Sully has been absolutely smashing it with these hooker bets.
Yeah.
Which, careful how you interpret that, but so follow him in with the hookers every time is what I'd say is my tip for the weekend.
That sounds way worse.
Oh, that's entirely accidental. I didn't mean it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for bearing with us for this one. Some absolutely corking games. I hope you really enjoy them, and good luck with all your bets this weekend. We'll see you back for the semi-finals.